Hello and welcome to a new episode of Lead and Create. Bear with me for a moment because I want to record this as well. Hello and welcome to a new episode of Lead and Create podcast. This episode is also being recorded in a camera, so you can access it from YouTube, hopefully, if it all works well. And this episode is for teachers. So, teachers, we see you. We have been talking a lot for choreographers, and the reality is that a lot of us are also teachers. Myself, I have been a teacher since the times of NDC Wales, and that goes back to 2009 when I was teaching workshops. And then, of course, I was teaching workshops for Hofesh for a really long time. And since 2017, I'm teaching regularly at National Center for Circus Arts. And this episode is for teachers who want to get a bit more clarity on to what extent we can influence the dynamics that are going on in our studio. If you are anything like me, you know how important the environment is. It is important for learning, it is important for creating, for any artistic endeavor in which you need a certain amount of trust, a certain amount of vulnerability and courage to take creative risks. And as we know by now, leadership can really have a big influence in that environment. And teachers are leaders that can have a huge influence in someone's career. They can really make a difference, inspire someone, encourage someone, make them believe that they can actually become professionals, like some teachers did with me. And also, if you've been teaching for a while, you know that different groups of people have different dynamics going on. And of course, the individual personalities are at play, but it's also about how those personalities come together, right? What are the interactions? What are the specific combination, and how these people look up at each other, or how they together establish what are the common traits of that group. And of course, as a teacher, you know that there are many factors, and of course, some years you might have more work going on the side, or maybe you have been teaching for a while the same curriculum or really similar curriculum, and the different groups of people have completely different energies in regards to even the same tasks or the same exercises. The results are extraordinarily different. And like I said, there can be external factors, like the fact that you as a teacher are perhaps having other things going on outside. Maybe that specific day you were more nervous or tired, or you had time to prepare for that class or didn't have time to prepare for that class. It's happened to all of us. And then there are things in the moment, like how well you explained that exercise, the instructions of the task, or how much you've checked for understanding before diving in, right? How you've managed the time on that specific day. But when you look at the term, or when you look at the year as a whole, you still see that generally some groups are more committed or more ready to step out of their comfort zone, or generally more responsive. And I think the big question here is there anything we can do about it, or we just have to accept it? As many of you know, I am fascinated about human interaction, right? That's why the initial spirit of Lead and Create started. And I'm interested in how we relate to each other and what are the conditions that make us get specific information or be in a position that emotionally is more open, more trusting, more vulnerable, more ready for the the creative risks that we're taking, right? And specifically in terms of leadership, what is the environment and the knowledge that really brings the best in all of us as artists collaborating together? And like I've said in the past, I think many of us manage people on intuition alone. That manage people on intuition alone. That happens to all of us. But like I've said in the past, there are many resources that are based on scientific research that social psychologists have been working, studying thousands of people and really seeing the common interactions, looking at communication strategies, looking at time management, and looking at self-regulation as well. And of course, these resources ask you to take a moment for yourself and make time, schedule time outside of your busy day to day to really build a set of tools that actually works for you. But that set of tools has to be built outside of pressure environment. I think it's a big ask for you to figure it all out in the moment when there's the 20 students are looking for you and are waiting for your instructions. So therefore, I'm a big believer in training for that moment so that you can be confident and you can really make the best out of the situation. Because we have a huge responsibility as teachers, and that is wonderful as well. And there's a lot we can do, and there's a lot we're doing. So well done for you for being a committed teacher. Well done for you for listening to this or watching this video, because you're already in the right path. And if you've been following Lead and Create, you know that last year we launched our course in leadership for independent choreographers. And I'm really pleased that this year in October, we're launching it again and it's coming back. So look out for the opening of bookings, which will be at the beginning of October, and the course will start at the end of October. But also today, this week, we are launching 1 day in-person professional development for teachers to look at these leadership tools in the context of education specifically, which of course has very different traits in some of the environment and the conditions in which they happen. So the course will be on Sunday, the 28th of September, and it will be in London. And as with the choreographer's course, I have asked specialists in different areas that I consider really important to join me. So we will have Kerry Johnson, who is a dance and sports psychology, talking about self-regulation for yourself as a teacher. So you know how much talk there is for mental health for students, and it's fantastic that we're now taking that into account. But as teachers, what we do is so demanding. We're constantly giving our attention outwards into other people. And it's equally important that we also have these tools to regulate ourselves, to really go back, to nourish, to be able to be in the best possible place in order to nurture, look after, care, inspire our students. So Carrie will be talking about that, and we're talking that aspect, regulate. I will be talking about studio dynamics, so a little bit more in depth of what I'm doing in this session, and talking about communication, talking about how to deal with difficult attitudes, and essentially how to be clearer in your goals, how to be clearer in your instructions, and how to really make people feel seen and adapt the teaching to the individual needs and interest of your students. And then we will also have some social time for peer exchange. So when I was preparing for this course, I was talking to different teachers, and they were saying how important it is to get together to talk about these things. And maybe your own work environment as a teacher doesn't allow you to be completely free to share these challenges or insecurities or difficulties because you feel judged or you feel that it's going to have an impact in your job. But it's really important because then through sharing, we often find that it's not an individual experience. A lot of people have gone through that. And therefore, I've been asked by many people to have that social moment, which will be facilitated. So you will be able to talk to different people, and it's not going to be feel awkward and be like, oh, I just need to like walk up to someone and introduce myself. It will be facilitated. You'll get the chance to meet the people in the room and really talk about these issues together and find how other people have dealt with them, which I find is the best way of learning, right? And then in the afternoon, we will have a Q&A, and it will be a panel of 3 people. We will have Tom English. Tom is the MA at the Place course leader for the dance program. And we will have Andrew Sanger as well. Andrew is responsible for the curriculum in terms of the booking the seminars, also of the MA dance program at the Place, and myself. And we're going to be talking about how do you assess where your students are? How do you see the curriculum that you planned? How do you see how much flexibility is it in there? And also whether that is um, really going to be realistic for the people that you are encountering, how much there is that you can adapt in the moment, how do you check that is relevant, and then what are the instructions, how do you break down the steps for your students to go from where they are to where you want them to be. And we've decided to do it as a Q&A, as a panel discussion, because of course there's not one way. We have different ways. I also come more from the circus teaching background, and it will be a great chance for you to ask questions, for you to get involved into the discussion as well and give your own opinions and your own experiences, but through the lens of people who are really experienced and can really propose new ideas, but also talk about things that haven't worked and things that we can learn from. So I think it's a really exciting program. You'll then have a little bit of time at the end of the day to go back into groups to discuss whatever findings you have had, whatever realizations, and then we will wrap up. So it will be 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., a full day. And like I said, it will be on the 28th of September. And there is an early bird offer to book until the 10th of September. You'll get a discounted price. So back to these dynamics that we were talking about. I sometimes see them as undercurrents that are happening below the surface. And we might not be fully aware of them in the moment, but we definitely feel their influence. And in terms of these dynamics, I want to talk about 3 points. And by the way, I will link in the podcast the document with the slides, so you can follow this. If you're a visual person that benefits from reading the points, you can download it and then just check it alongside listening or watching this video. And the first point I want to talk about is the distribution of roles within the group. So we can look at a little bit at who are the leaders and what is the influence that they are having. The second point I want to talk about is the social norms, which in other words are the unwritten rules of conduct that we have in any human interaction. And then the third point is the expectancy. So in other words, memories that your students might have of previous failures or successes, and also what success means for them. So in terms of the first point, the roles, as humans, we assess where we are in the pack pretty quickly, right? We're not always the leader, even though we might have that kind of personality. In different groups of people, we take on different roles. And we do that in our family, we do that in our groups of friends, and we do that at work also very often. And what's interesting as well is that in groups that have been working together for a long time, for example, a group of friends, the leaders might change over time. So if you look at your group of friends that you've been having since you were a teenager, for example, like myself, the leader of when you were a teenager is probably not the same leader of when you were in your 20s, when you were in your 30s, or like me, when you're in your 40s. And what's interesting about looking at who is the leader when is because the leader appointment or an official appointment depends on the values of the group at that time. And as a teacher, you come into a room, and let's specifically look at groups that have been working together for a while, which is a bit different from groups that are just meeting new. But if they have known each other for a while, you can quickly gauge the different groups that are appearing in that class and how those groups are interacting with each other, and within each group, who is the leader. Of course, sometimes those leaders are easy to spot because they are the people that are louder, or they have no fear in expressing their opinions. And there are also subtle cues that you can take as well in how the people's eyes are directed, or like who do they listen to. And I think one of the powers we have as humans is our attention. So sometimes we actively give our attention to someone, and sometimes we don't, and it takes a really long time for that person to really get us. And that is a really good way to know who is the natural leader of that group. And today I also want to emphasize that there might be leaders that are actually quite silent, and they kind of step back, but you still see how people gravitate towards them. And it's really important to pay attention to those as well, because those can be easier to miss. And like I said, as a teacher, you come into a room, as soon as you identify the leaders, then you will know what the values of the groups are. And once you know the values, you know that you can influence them and you can pick out the best in them. And more on that a bit later, but I just want to tell you a really quick story. So I was talking to a friend a few years back, and he said in his school, the most popular kids were the ones that had better or higher marks. And I was really surprised about that, because that was certainly not the case in my school. And I always felt like that would be the case in every high school, that if you, especially being a female, if you had higher marks, then you were definitely not cool. And um, definitely not a thing to make you popular. But that was his experience. And I was like, oh, well, that's interesting. I wonder if that is because of the teacher's input, or of the specific connection and kind of combination of people. So whether it is the combination of people or not, the good news is that we can really influence those social norms. So once we know those values that we just got from watching the leaders, we can so we acknowledge them, and we can then nudge and influence them. And there is a wonderful film on Netflix now that is called Bad Seeds. Seeds is a French film, and it's a clear example of how you can shift those interaction. And I recommend you to watch it because it's funny, but it also rings true in many ways. And if you're still not convinced about these social norms, I can give you some examples of what they can be. So, for example, a social norm can be we don't ask questions. So another social norm can be we don't put effort in, or we don't want to ruin our makeup, or we are all wearing specific set of clothes. And you can really see that in the different groups of people. And for my in my own life and in my own career as a dancer, it's really funny to me to look back at the different companies I've been in. So I started professionally in Dance Works Rotterdam, and there the norm was to wear tight clothes and socks. And then I was dancing for NDC Wales, and there the rule was baggy top, shorts, and they could be tight, but no socks. And then in the third company that I danced in, Hofesh, was baggy clothes all over, long sleeves, long trousers, and back to the socks. And that's just for me, like that's just the same person in different years of my life going over different styles, and feeling really like I identified with them, and I was more comfortable dancing in them. And that just goes on to say that we have there's a huge influence of the group in us. And expert Peps McCrea says that we need to acknowledge these norms and leverage them in order to influence them. And what's also important for us as teachers is to have clarity on the norms that we want to establish, right? So we know the norms that are there, but we also need to know the norms that we want generally for these students to have. And it's important that we know them individually as teachers, but it's also really important that as a school, everybody's on the same page and we all work towards those norms. And PEPs call them the North Star norms. And what's also really important in terms of these norms that you want to establish is that it's more important to emphasize what you want to happen than what you don't want to happen. And the reason for that is that as humans, being sociable animals, we know the importance of committing to a group and following the norms, because that is how we are able to work together, right? How we are able to create societies, and how we are able to collaborate, right? By all agreeing on these norms, right? But the peer pressure when you don't conform to those norms is huge, and people are really going to have a hard time if they are different, if they don't belong to the group, if they don't do what the majority of the group is doing. So for example, in terms of this visibility I was talking about, if you say something along the lines of, I'm really frustrated because I was setting up this task and nobody or very few of you are paying attention. Fair enough. We've all done it, right? And fair enough, you are angry in the moment and you want to call them out. But what you're doing is you're bringing visibility to the fact that people are not paying attention. Therefore, the message you're sending to your students is nobody's doing that. And then the student is thinking, why should I? Right? If nobody else is doing, if the norm of this group of people that I'm in is to not pay attention, then it's dangerous or is a waste of my time or is too much energy for me to pay attention if nobody else is doing it. So what Peps is saying is that if you see any little beginnings or nuggets of this new norm that you want to establish coming through, take the chance to bring visibility to them. So, for example, say, I've seen more and more of you starting to take creative risks and working towards developing your skill set, for example. So if a student listens to that, they are like, oh, everybody's getting on with it, or everybody is now pushing through their comfort zone. And so should I, right? You see where I'm going with that. And then the last point that I wanted to make is about the expectancy, right? So sometimes as teachers, we assume that all of us want the same outcome and are clear with what success looks like. So, for example, as a circus teacher, as a movement teacher in a circus environment, I might think that all of my students want to create pieces that have layers that are layers of meaning that are conceptual, right? But it could be that they just want to create something that is a high achievement physically and has no underlying concept, for example. So we're essentially trying to aim for a different thing. We haven't clarified what it is that we're aiming for. And it's important as a teacher that we are really clear with that direction. So we're saying, like the leader in any creative process, we're saying, this is our vision, this is where we're heading, this is what success looks like. And then linking to that last sentence, this is what success looks like. I know that sentence sometimes makes people feel a bit itchy, but I think it's important in the sense of defining the arrival point. And what's important about that as well is that some students' idea of success might be another idea of failure, right? So, for example, if I'm saying as a teacher, I want you to go past the lines and work on asymmetry, which is something that I really value as a teacher. And they are really have been working for a really long time to have these perfect lines and these like really they have worked really hard to be symmetrical and to be super clean in their lines. Then what I'm asking them is like to completely modify their idea of success, right? So success is when you feel the movement and when it's so in your body that it doesn't follow a preconceived line, right? But it's also things like the idea of past experiences that they have had, right? So is really diving into what are their memories of success and what are their memories of failure, and really working on those. And it's not about telling them, yes, you're always going to succeed and you got this, because that's like that's not a real pull for motivation, but it's to say, I believe you can, I believe you can get there, and define where is there, right? Where do you want them to get to by the end of the term or by the end of the year, so that then you can look back and assess, and they themselves can look back and assess, did I get there? And they know, it's not about you giving them any surprising news. They know whether they got there, if there's clarity about what is the end goal. And just to summarize this last point, we need to define the success really clearly. It needs to be a success that is achievable for the majority of our students, which is something that we also need to take in account, so that they have an experience of success that will then motivate them to carry on, because it's a huge pull. If you're seeing yourself succeed, then it means that it's worth to invest time and energy into that. And we need to have a clear breakdown of steps to get there, and a way of measuring it or assessing it, so that both the student and yourself know whether they got there. And this assessment at the end of the term is not a surprise for anybody. And like I was touching on, this word motivation is huge, and is one of the things that I'm going to talk about in the course on the 28th of September, which is that there's data from compulsory education to say that there's evidence to suggest that for the average child, levels of motivation decline over the years. And I don't know what's the data for vocational students in our case, but some of that rings true. So I think it is possible that through getting into performing arts education, some students have less motivation when they finish than when they started. And that is totally manageable. So there are tools to really work on that motivation, to take on that responsibility that we have as teachers. I think it's an incredible opportunity to give someone knowledge, to give them the possibility of stepping into an industry that we're passionate about, and to enhance and cultivate that motivation so that they have their energy intact and they carry through, even though they might be more realistic. Of course, there are things that you find out about your career once you're in the thick of it that you might not know before you start, but that they are ready to put in the effort to be artists and get into the industry. But we need to know the science behind motivation and understand how to assess where the students are, what are the instructions that we can give them to achieve the curriculum that is realistic for most of them, and also how do we regulate ourselves. So I'm going back to the teacher's course because I've created it with these ideas in mind, that we can really look at the science and research of education to be better teachers for our students. And to finish off, I just wanted to say that we give every week free resources in terms of newsletter. So they are either links to this podcast, or they are thoughts, experiences that we're sharing, or opportunities like these courses or like the Rethinking Leadership conversations. And I'm going to link I'm going to put the link to sign up into our newsletter in the notes. And please share these resources, share these opportunities with more and more people, because I think amongst us all, we have a real opportunity to change how the industry works. I know many of us have had bad experiences of leadership in which we haven't felt valued. We have felt like we were wasting our time, or we were like banging our head against this brick wall, and wanted so badly to become dancers or to give our best, and we're not allowed to because the conditions and the environment was not helping us. So we can really do that better. I really honestly think we can do this better. And I'm on a mission to get more people to be better leaders. So please tune in back to this podcast, sign in, sign up to the mailing list and to our courses, and let's keep creating better working spaces for everyone.